even summer day 여긴 항상 내가 everyday 별로사야 하늘을
Hello and welcome to my channel. I had a very busy few weeks, so I had to put some of the video making on pause, but I'm back, and today I want to talk about the big four Korean entertainment companies, or SM, YG, JYP, and hybe, and specific things they do that kind of perplex me. This isn't going to be a deep dive into the major dynamics of each company, instead mostly one or two small things for each of them that I don't see people talk about too often. And let me insert a disclaimer here. I am rarely gonna be a hater on this channel. Everything I discuss in this video isn't necessarily bad, and when I mention any groups, I'm not trying to be directly critical of them. I just have to use some examples here and there. And as usual, this is all just for fun. So without further ado, let's start with hybe. I'm a hybe stan at my core, so I notice just about every single quirk that this company has, but the one I want to touch on today is the fact that big hit producers love to take shortcuts when it comes to their artists' music. If you're not aware, Big Hit Music is an independent company under hybe, but their in-house producers are responsible for several hybe groups' discographies, even some who weren't technically debuted under Big Hit Music, like ENHYPEN and LE SSERAFIM. Taking shortcuts with music is definitely a common issue in K-pop, but I just think that Big Hit are the worst offenders of the major companies right now. For one, there's an obvious heavy emphasis on keeping all songs, including B-sides, as short as possible, which again, a common practice in K-pop, but in any given Big Hit produced album, you would be lucky to find just one song that's longer than 3 minutes and 30 seconds. This alone isn't too much of an issue as long as the songs are still good, but the albums just end up being so short, and oftentimes this means those songs don't come together fully, and they all follow really similar, arguably lackluster formulas. It seems like Big Hit's favorite thing to do recently to make title tracks shorter but not too short is totally remove the bridge and add a repetitive little post-chorus. Sometimes they'll make that post-chorus the intro of the song. Other times they'll keep the bridge but just make either that or the verses very short. But the one thing you can pretty much always count on right now is the repetitive little post-chorus. Another side to this shortcut tendency Big Hit has that's unique to ENHYPEN and LE SSERAFIM is including very short intro tracks to fluff up the amount of songs in their albums, and in ENHYPEN's case, outros as well. Listen, I'm one of the few engines and one of the few fear knots that actually enjoys these and plays them when I listen through the albums. But for one, this is clearly a little cheaty. It's almost definitely meant to make the albums look fuller, and if they want to release a more expensive full album or repackage album, these are convenient in helping them meet the minimum track requirement. But what's really frustrating about these tracks is they will take the most, I'm gonna get upset, they'll create the most delectable instrumentals, melodies, and choruses and stick them in an intro or outro that is almost entirely narration and not that replayable. I may sound like I'm trashing their production decisions, and that's not fully true, but these shortcuts they take do have a bit of an impact on song and album quality. I don't think some of these songs and albums are nearly as bad as some people say they are, but it is a little bit of a shame when we're not able to hear the full potential this music could have reached without rushing or restrictions. Some big hit producers have recently talked about being strapped for time or being encouraged to keep the song short to make streaming easier, which is always just kind of sad to read. Do I think it's the end of the world? No, and knowing them, I think that this is probably more of a phase, and they'll open their hearts to actually fleshing out and taking time with their music again soon, seeing that streaming records aren't being drastically affected by song length right now. So I think everyone who's been complaining about some recent hype releases may be able to breathe soon. That, or they might just develop a new quirk that will also cause people to complain. We don't always know with them. So for SM, I actually have two things that are pretty different, so I won't have the smoothest transition ever, but just bear with me. I'll start with the more obvious one, which is the kind of unique, choppy format of many of their group's title tracks. To better sum this up, I fully came to this realization that this was a recurring theme when I saw a tweet about an SM group that said something like, "I've never heard a song from them that just flows." And when I read that, even though it was in a negative context and I don't agree with that, everything clicked for me. Maybe this was obvious to a lot of people, but I could never quite put my finger on it. And once I did, it's all I can think about when I listen to a lot of SM title tracks, especially from the past couple years. You could argue this is something SM has always done because it is, but for the most part, their older groups' discographies would have a lot of variety to split up these kinds of releases, whereas it's become much more consistent with groups like NCT, aespa, and Got the Beat. These artists all have titles and some B-sides that are very segmented. They have such distinct parts with abrupt transitions, and usually these parts consist of more simple, rap-heavy or chanty verses and choruses with a minimalist, for lack of a better word, instrumental. And then the pre-choruses and bridge typically have more layers and are more flowy and vocal heavy. And then a lot of the time there's also a loud explosive dance break with a high note somewhere. While saying this, I could immediately think of at least 4 songs from the past year alone that fit this exact formula. There are other recent SM titles that have this kind of choppiness with slightly different approaches, but the bottom line is SM has really been loving these sort of clunky, intense, out-of-the-box songs. And it's interesting because typically when you see a company so consistently repeat formulas like this, it's because it's safe and it's worked for them. But these songs aren't that safe and are either some of the group's biggest hits or some of their most criticized releases. The other problem I wanted to talk about is that SM is very often getting criticized for reusing or taking existing projects from themselves and other non-affiliated artists. I'm not sure if other companies are doing this as much as them and are just getting away with it, but it seems like SM gets backlash for directly ripping off projects too often for such a major company, whether it's set designs, album designs, song titles, song samples, variety show concepts. It just seems like they're constantly in trouble for this. Some of these things are way less serious than others, but it still kind of indicates a bigger issue. Something I think is also kind of related, but not nearly as bad, because they pay for the rights to own these, is that since the first few years of SM's existence, they often buy demos, many of which are released songs from Western artists, and re-release them for their idols, usually with some slight changes, but always keeping the most notable parts of the songs.
I'm on the next level, yeah, I'm coming over.
This has been the case with so many of their iconic titles, even a lot that most fans have no idea came from a Western release. I think in the really early days when they were doing this, it was more of an attempt to incorporate Western music into Korea and K-pop, but now I wonder if, when it happens, it's because there are so many artists in the company and only so many in-house producers, that this is the route they take just to make comeback preparations a little bit easier. If I wanted to connect both of these quirks about SM, I would say All of this is probably Lee Sumin's fault somehow, but actually with him getting pushed out and Kakao essentially buying SM, it seems that the new SM 3.0 plan the company wants to approach may cause some kind of reform in both of the things I talked about. Similarly to JYP, there will be many different divisions, and with all of the artists they've signed for decades, they'll be given different teams to meet their needs. So we'll probably see some changes in the artist's music, and the creative teams hopefully won't be spread so thin that they have to reuse ideas and concepts. Either way, it's not like these are extremely serious issues or anything, at least to me. I think it's fun that SM has some of its little quirks, at least when it comes to the music. If anyone would be happy with this kind of dysfunctional music, it's me. I've never stanned any YG artists, so I don't see much of how the company handles things, but I do keep up with everybody, and my complaints with YG mainly stem from the fact that they are so stuck in their ways. There are YG groups that debuted nearly a decade ago, or even more than a decade ago, that have the same concepts, music, and general dynamics as their new groups. Obvious examples of this are the way YG marketed Blackpink before their debut as a 21 redo, the way they're marketing Baby Monster as Blackpink's offspring, or the way Treasure and iKON have extremely similar discographies, both of which take a lot of inspiration from Big Bang. Now, this isn't necessarily a terrible thing because they've found what they're good at, and I can appreciate that. And it's even why YG has so many veteran company stans that love and defend all of their groups. But it does mean that sometimes they'll do something a little bit different and interesting, and I go, oh, this could be really cool. But then it doesn't really go anywhere. I feel like their new pre-debut group, Baby Monster, is a good example I can use here. And before you say, what are you talking about? They haven't even debuted yet. I completely get that. The point I want to make here is that this group has technically been in progress for many years, and since before they were even officially announced, I convinced myself YG would completely revamp them. For a few months, there were two directions I was considering Baby Monster might go in musically. That would be different from the standard dance, trap, hip-hop, pop genres YG artists most often promote with. The main genre fusion I considered for Baby Monster was old school hip-hop and R&B. I think most YG trainees do practice these genres often, but it's not extremely present in their discographies, especially their titles. I thought Baby Monster might go this way because, for one, YG groups have released a few R&B songs over the years that have been some of their biggest hits. Two, I feel like there have been some old school hip-hop seeds being planted recently, initially in Blackpink's two latest releases, Pink Venom and Shutdown, which both took a lot of inspiration from songs in this genre.
Kick in the door, waving the coco. Black pen and ink, got bodies like Rambo, rest in peace. Blackpink in your area. Yeah.
And later, Baby Monster's dance performance from January, where the styling and choreography really gave off this concept to me. I didn't have much to back this one up, but the other genre I considered their music could end up being inspired by was reggaeton, which we haven't seen much of in YG songs, but the genre has been very much on the rise both globally and in K-pop, and it was something I could picture YG delving into if they were to try something new. However, once Baby Monster's covers and introductory videos started being released, it became pretty obvious that all of the girls have had training directly reminiscent of all the current YG idols. And considering the fact that YG himself hasn't been outcasted from the company and is heavily involved in the creation of this group and the training of the girls, I'm just not sure that we're going to get much from them that we haven't seen before. I'm not dogpiling on Baby Monster because they're all so talented, and for people who do enjoy YG artists, I'm positive they're going to deliver what you like. And again, maybe they'll totally surprise me and do something completely out of the box, which in that case, I will hold my hands up. I do wish there were more specific niches for YG that I could get into, but of all the ones I'm aware of, they're pretty major and get talked about often, and I obviously wanted this video to be about slightly less discussed topics. YG's stubbornness isn't necessarily a secret, but it has been something I think about more often lately, given how much everybody else is doing the opposite and racing to keep up with how quickly K-pop is changing. So as for what decisions YG decide to make in the future, and how Baby Monster's debut will be received, we'll just have to wait and see. Something that's interesting about the Big Four is we see some kind of cohesion throughout all or most of the groups they've debuted over the years, but for JYP, I feel like a lot of the time, they're just kind of throwing shit at the wall to see what sticks. You could say they have the exact opposite problem of what I talked about with YG. In SM, you know that all of their groups have some of the best vocalists in K-pop, many of their title tracks are very unique, and their artists' main demographics are South Korea and China. In hybe, their artists are held to very high performance standards, there are production quirks found in all of their discographies, and their groups are very much marketed to Western fans. In YG, like I talked about, all of their groups are extremely similar in every aspect, with just some slight tuning and exploration here and there. And those aren't even all of the consistencies you can find in those companies. They've spent years figuring out what they want and how they want to build their legacies overall. Whereas with JYP, of course they're a renowned company, and there are a few baseline things that you can find in all of their artists, but otherwise, the way the company manages each of their groups so differently has made it so that there's not really one overarching theme I can think of when I hear the name JYP. It seems that the vision in JYP has always been to create several hit groups and tune each group's needs accordingly, rather than heavily tune them to fit a company standard, if that makes sense. Their boy groups are probably a bit more consistent, but still, say, GOT7 and Stray Kids, aside from their basic images and the members themselves, and the fact that they're both largely self-produced, there's quite a bit of variation in their concepts, music, and what the members are most talented in. Stray Kids' music is heavily influenced by hip-hop and pop, and they are a much more rap-oriented group with edgy and explosive concepts, as well as some pretty intense choreographies. GOT7, on the other hand, explored many different concepts and genres while they were under JYP. They were well-rounded, and shared some similar characteristics as Stray Kids, but more so had some stronger vocalists in the group. As far as JYP's girl groups, they again have extremely similar members who could maybe be interchangeable in terms of their personal images, but that's pretty much where the consistency ends, with all of them going through quite different training and debuting with very different core sounds and concepts. Twice had your classic cute concept and have always been more performance-oriented, eventually becoming really strong dancers over the years. ITZY debuted with a teen crush concept characterized by very energetic and bouncy music, and are one of the strongest dance and performance groups in all of K-pop. NMIXX debuted with the mix pop concept. That's kind of hard for me to explain, but the girls were trained to be very well-rounded in terms of vocals, dancing, and rap. And when I talk about JYP's girl groups, it brings me to this one point I want to make that kind of ties all of this together, and it may sound a little bit contradictory, but it's the fact that JYP doesn't have some kind of core strategy for all of their groups to fall back on, which means, historically, they'll be made to dive headfirst into a specific concept early in their careers, but once the company decides they don't think that concept is working anymore, they just start, like I said at the beginning of the segment, throwing shit at the wall to see what sticks. Many of us know that GOT7 experienced a power struggle with Park Jin-young himself, which caused a little chaos in their creative direction. In 2019, they decided that with Twice becoming older, they wanted to steer away from the firm, strictly cute concept they had for years, and since 2020, we've been getting all kinds of genres in their title tracks. ITZY have been going through a very similar situation where JYP decided to take them out of this teen crush bubble with Mafia in the Morning, and since then there's been a lot of back and forth with their releases, and Mix debuted in February 2022 and had a comeback in September 2022, both with titles fully encompassed by their mix pop concept. And now in March 2023, their new releases are not mix pop, like, at all. It seems natural to point out that there are several different divisions in JYP, which each group get assigned to, so they all technically have different teams making these decisions, which would account for the variations in their group's core identities. However, I think the specific trend of the company deciding to just start doing new things when they feel like it probably has more to do with the higher-ups, including Park Jin-young himself. Ultimately, this is all why I find it a bit difficult to understand this company. And this is a topic I could go on forever about because it goes pretty deep. But I don't want this video to be too long, and I don't think it's a super major issue. So for now, we'll wrap it up here. And that concludes this video. I'm not necessarily an expert in business or music, so if you listen to me talk about anything that you feel like you can offer some insight on, I would love for you to comment, because a lot of the time I bring up these discussions so I can think through it and learn more. And if you are a fan of any big four groups and want to comment about the flaws or quirks you've observed in these companies, please feel free to do that as well. Lastly, I want to put it out there that my busy schedule makes preparing these videos a lot harder than I anticipated, and even though I will still try my best to upload at least once or twice a month, if you want specific updates about when I plan to release videos, then you can go ahead and follow my Twitter. If not, I will try to post some updates on my community tab here and there. Anyways, thank you so much for tuning in today. I'm looking forward to reading and responding to all of your comments, and I will see you in the next video. Goodbye.